good warm coffee. Gotta have some good coffee. Back out here in the warehouse again, folks. Welcome back to our ministry here at What the Bible Says, and to another to another video where we are continuing in this series where we are debunking the typical objections that are raised against all things fulfilled. A little bit nippy out here today, that's why I need some good warm coffee. Right now we think we've got about 8 inches of ice and snow on the ground. It's still coming down. And so, as I said, a little bit nippy out here. But we'll endure it just for you. And boy, have we got a treat in store for you today. Because today, we are taking a swan dive into a critical analysis of Cougan Collins and his rebuttals to my Death of Futurism argument. And many of you, you're probably familiar with the 10 points that I have presented in this article as I've been, of course, I've amended it recently, and I shared this argument across multiple platforms, groups, emails, etc., since April of 2021. And to date, I have not had one futurist that actually addressed the heart of the argument. Actually, that's not exactly true. There was one person who kind of took a stab at it, and when he made the admission that he agreed that all of Daniel was fulfilled, I pointed out the ramifications of that admission, and he vanished. So, in effect, there has not been one futurist yet to deal with the heart of my argument. But Brother Collins has stepped up to the plate, and he has offered quite a response. Some 4,600 words, nicely laid out, very efficient. I appreciate that, as always. But we are going to jump into a critical analysis of his rebuttals. And again, this argument that I have presented, it showcases how the Old and New Testament eschatological prophecies converge into a unified, fulfilled eschaton within the time frame which Jesus outlined on multiple occasions. And again, since Brother Collins has provided definitely, the most verbose and thorough response that I have ever received to my argument, then I certainly am anxious to show it to you, to share this with you, and to see just how well Brother Collins' rebuttals hold up under scrutiny. Now, if you are familiar, and I'm going to be displaying my argument point by point on the screen as we go along, so it's very simple that you can pause the video and thoroughly read each point. And so, in the introduction to the argument, as well as in the closing of the argument, I purposely point out that I do not give any of my interpretation on any passage listed. I do that for a specific reason, which almost everybody ignores, as does Brother Collins. And so throughout his rebuttals, he accuses me, or he says the 80-70 theory, that's accusing me in his mind. He accuses me 7 times of using my interpretation. Ironically, he admits 5 times himself that he is giving his interpretations. How about that? All right, so the first claim, that is that Daniel 7 contains the only Old Testament prophecy of the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven for the opening of the book's judgment. Well, it's hilarious that Brother Collins agrees with my simple point, but is very verbose in trying to deny it. He states that Daniel 7, 13, and 14 describes the Son of Man receiving dominion, glory, and a kingdom from the Ancient of Days, which he claims corresponds to Christ's ascension and enthronement, not the quote-unquote final judgment. And he argues that the book's judgment in Revelation 20 and verse 12 is distinct from Daniel 7, which he views as focused on Christ's universal and eternal reign. And he says that AD 70 is too localized to fulfill the universal scope of Daniel's vision. So as we assess what Brother Collins has said, we notice that Brother Collins did not touch the heart of my argument that the New Testament ties all references to the Son of Man's coming in the clouds, like Matthew 24:30, Matthew 16:27-28, and so on, that Jesus ties these specifically to the time frame that he posits as being the fulfillment of Daniel 7. And Brother Collins introduces a false dichotomy by separating Daniel 7 from Revelation 20 and verse 12 without addressing how the eschatological elements in Daniel's immediate context, the judgment and the dominion given to the Son of Man for the eternal kingdom, how that these align with the events interpreted and described by Jesus in the Olivet Discourse. And Brother Collins ties Paul's judgment prediction of Acts 17:31 to Revelation 20 and verse 12, while ignoring the judgment scene of Daniel 7 and verse 10 and following, and contradicts himself by arguing that oikumene in Matthew 24:14 only refers to the Roman Empire and not the entire globe, while he interprets oikumene in Paul's judgment prediction in Acts 17 globally, which is a flat-out self-contradiction. Also, it is another contradiction when Brother Collins acknowledges the global reign of Christ but denies its manifestation in AD 70 despite Jesus explicitly linking his coming taken from Daniel 7 to his generation, Matthew 24:34, which Brother Collins admits was the people to whom Jesus was speaking. So another glaring self-contradiction. And through this analysis, as we look at these things, we're going to be offering Brother Collins some counter questions. All right, number one. If Daniel 7, 13, and 14 refers solely to Christ's ascension, then how do you explain Jesus applying this passage to his future coming before the Sanhedrin Council in Matthew 26:64, telling them that they would see him sitting at the right hand of God and coming in the clouds of heaven? Number two. Now, Brother Collins has said it. Now, this is in another document. But Brother Collins has said, quote, Jesus' statement in Luke 9:27 was fulfilled at Pentecost when his kingdom came with power. The transformative effects of the gospel demonstrated the kingdom's power and glory as thousands were added to the church, fulfilling Old Testament prophecies such as Daniel 7, 13, and 14. Oops. All right, so, Brother Collins, how can you blatantly deny Jesus positing the fulfillment of Daniel 7:13 after Matthew 24:14, that is, after the gospel will be preached in all the world for a witness to all nations, and thus you are making Jesus a false prophet? All right, so in claim number two, to my point number two, that is that Daniel 12 is the only Old Testament prophecy of a resurrection of both the just and the unjust. Again, Brother Collins agrees with that point, but he again is very verbose in trying to deny it. That is very suspect. And he asserts that Daniel 12:2 refers to a future universal bodily resurrection, aligning with passages like John 5:28 and 29, and again Revelation 20:11 through 15. And he refutes the AD 70 fulfillment as overly localized and incompatible with the New Testament's portrayal of the resurrection as global and physical. Now, that in his mind, he's refuting that. And, remarkably, he cites Wayne Jackson as an authority. He cites Wayne Jackson's argument that the resurrection described in Daniel 12 transcends Jerusalem's destruction. All right, so as we analyze what Brother Collins offers, then we notice that Brother Collins reconstructs my argument about the timing and the nature of the resurrection into his straw man of a localized versus a universal fulfillment. And he fails to address how Daniel 12 and verse 2's timing is inextricably linked to the time of the end, verses 4 and 7 of that text, which Brother Collins admits was fulfilled in AD 70. And then we have the logical fallacy in that he assumes his mythological universal resurrection must be physical and future, which totally disregards my argument that the New Testament writers describe their anticipation of the resurrection of the dead ones out of Hades to be the consummation of the resurrection of the whole house of Israel. Christians were already resurrected out of death into eternal life, so why would they need a lesser, inferior, bodily resurrection? Excuse me. And then we have his textual contradiction. Brother Collins cites Acts 24:15 to support a future bodily resurrection, while he overlooks or ignores Paul's use of mello, the Greek present tense verb mello, which indicates imminence, about to occur, which is in the same context, the preceding verse. All right, so here are counter questions for Brother Collins. Number one, if Daniel 12's resurrection is universal and future to us, why does Daniel specify the timing to coincide with the shattering of the power of the holy people? Verse 7. Number two, how can you ignore this textual fact that if your assertion is accurate and the shattering of the power of the holy people is yet in our future, then the only holy people that could be under consideration would be Christians, and their power is the gospel. So, Brother Collins, how do you explain that, brother? Number three, why do you ignore the textual fact that the judgment and the resurrection of Daniel 12, is inextricably linked to Daniel's people? That's what the text says, brother. Why are you redefining and reconstructing this text into your destruction of Christianity theology? All right, point number three. And you see it on your screen. All right, Brother Collins attempts to rebut this by saying that Daniel 12 integrates localized events like Jerusalem's destruction with broader cosmic implications, resurrection and judgment, that cannot be confined to AD 70. And then he cites his multi-layered prophecy patterns idea in Daniel, where near-term events foreshadow ultimate eschatological realities. All right, so again, as we assess what Brother Collins has offered, the summation of what he has offered, then we see that Brother Collins's multi-layered prophecy idea, this approach fails epically to address the textual continuity of Daniel 12, where the resurrection and judgment are tied directly to the events surrounding Jerusalem's fall. Again, as every opponent I have ever encountered, Brother Collins ignores the heart of my argument, and that is Jesus' interpretation and application of Daniel's prophecies. Again, he accuses me 7 times of giving my interpretation when I gave no interpretation. And Brother Collins is following the typical objection path of contradicting Jesus' interpretation by his own convoluted, illogical, and nonsensical interpretations. All right, here's a logical inconsistency. Brother Collins claims that Daniel 12's resurrection is universal while admitting its historical setting involves the shattering of the holy people in AD 70. And this demonstrates that Brother Collins' imaginary dual fulfillment, in spite of Jesus saying that it would never occur again, that it's imaginary. It's implausible. Jesus said it's never going to happen again. Brother Collins says, nope, it's going to happen again. All right, and then in Matthew 24:21, Jesus said, for then there will be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of this world until this time, no, nor ever shall be. Joel said, blow the trumpet in Zion, and he says, for the day of the Lord is coming, Joel 2 and verse 1. Verse 2, he says, a day of clouds and of thick darkness like the morning clouds spread over the mountains, a people come great and strong, the like of whom has never been, nor will there ever be any such after them, even for many successive generations. But again, Brother Collins says, nope, it's going to happen again. And you see, this is a blatant contradiction, as Brother Collins' argument dissolves under its own weight by denying the significance of AD 70 while asserting that it prefigures a greater fulfillment. All right, here's our counter questions. Number one, what scriptural basis, Brother Collins, allows you to separate Daniel 12's resurrection and judgment from the time of the end, verse 7, which Jesus emphatically applied to the destruction of Jerusalem? Number two, if prophecy operates on a multi-layered pattern, then how can you determine and how can you explain to your audience which layer applies to which eschatological event? Which layer are we in right now today? Since we must be living in an age of prophecy. You see, Jesus said, Luke 21 verse 22, these be the days of vengeance, that all things that are written are to be fulfilled. And so, why do you make Jesus a false prophet by asserting that we are still living in an age of unfulfilled prophecy? Yeah, that's how serious this is, folks. All right, you see my point number 4 on your screen. And Brother Collins attempts to rebut this by saying, and he acknowledges, you got to catch the power of this, as Brother Preston would say. Brother Collins acknowledges that Daniel 9:24 through 27 predicts Christ's first coming, but he argues prophecy's fulfillment extends beyond the 70 weeks. He cites New Testament passages like Acts 3:18 through 21 and Revelation 20 again as evidence of unfulfilled eschatological prophecy. So as we analyze Brother Collins's rebuttals, we see once again that Brother Collins does not address my point that Daniel 9 explicitly ties the fulfillment of all vision and prophecy to the 70 weeks time frame, verse 24. Brother Collins ignores Jesus' interpretation of, quote, to seal up vision and prophecy as, quote, these be the days of vengeance in which all things that are written are to be fulfilled. And then we have this contradiction. He affirms Christ's redemptive work fulfills prophecy, but denies its finality, creating a huge theological catastrophe, for lack of a better word. Short circuit, maybe. And then we have his self-contradiction. Brother Collins states that Daniel 9:27 was fulfilled in AD 70. The abomination of desolation would be the completion of the time. Wait a minute. Let's back up and hit that again. Brother Collins states that Daniel 9:27 was fulfilled in AD 70. But Daniel 9:27 is the abomination of desolation, which would be the completion of the time. What time? The 70 weeks time frame. Yeah. And you see, Brother Collins is in direct contradiction of the Scripture by asserting that these predictions extend beyond AD 70. And what's interesting is that if you look at the Septuagint, the word that is used there for the completion of the time is suntelia. That's what the disciples asked Jesus in the question. Tell us, what shall be the sign of your coming? When shall these things be? What shall be the sign of your parousia and of the suntelia of the age? Interesting, right? That the very word that the Septuagint uses is the word they use to ask Jesus about the end of the age. And Jesus quotes and says that Daniel 9:27, and Brother Collins agrees with, that it was fulfilled in AD 70. But it's a completion of the time, not an extension of the time. You see how he has exactly opposing ideas? You see, he meets himself coming back. All right, so here's our counter questions for Brother Collins. Number one, if the 70 weeks prophecy of Daniel 9 specifies that prophecy would be sealed up and completed within the 70 weeks, how do you justify extending fulfillment beyond this period, which you admit was fulfilled in AD 70? Tackle that one, Brother Collins. Number two, how do you reconcile Acts 3:21's restoration of all things with Jesus' statement that all prophecy was to be fulfilled in AD 70, Luke 21:22? Number three, how can you assert that all prophecy of Daniel 9 does not include all New Testament prophecy when Jesus quoted Daniel's prophecy specifically, even naming Daniel the prophet, and posited their fulfillment during the generation which you admit would be the ones witnessing the fall of the temple? Yeah. All right, number four, how can you assert that all prophecy of Daniel 9 does not include all New Testament prophecy when Paul said that his eschatology was taken solely from Moses and the prophets? Acts 26:22. Number five, how can you assert that all prophecy of Daniel 9 does not include New Testament prophecy when Peter said that all the Old Testament prophets, as many as have spoken, likewise foretold of the same time frame that Moses spoke of to foretell the coming of Messiah? And Peter called it these days, not those days many, many millennia away. All right, number five. You see it on your screen. Brother Collins says he actually agrees that Matthew 24, 4 through 35 pertains to AD 70, but then he claims verse 36 introduces a new topic, that is, Christ's future second coming. And again, this is the typical objection that is always raised against a united discourse of Matthew 24 and 25. All right, so as we assess Brother Collins's claim, rebuttal, we immediately find a logical fallacy, and that is Brother Collins imposes an artificial division in Matthew 24, totally ignoring the textual continuity of verses 27 through 39, the inclusio. Brother Collins states that the Great Tribulation culminated in AD 70. So we have a contradiction. Daniel 12 inextricably links the book's judgment and the resurrection of the just and the unjust to the Great Tribulation. So, since it culminated in AD 70, then it can't be in our future. Again, that is a blatant contradiction. Another contradiction. Brother Collins acknowledges that this generation of Matthew 24:34 refers to AD 70, that is, the generation that would witness the fall of the temple and those events that Jesus mentions. But he denies the comprehensive nature of Jesus' time frame. And then we have the self-contradiction of Brother Collins yet again. You see, folks, Brother Collins has admitted that, quote, the definite article, that's in the Greek, that's the boat, the rock, you get the picture. Okay, so Brother Collins has admitted that, quote, the article with parousia in the Greek denotes a unique and singular event. And thus our counter questions for Brother Collins. Number one, what textual, not presuppositional opinions, Brother Collins, what textual evidence supports your claim that Matthew 24:36 shifts topics? What is your linguistic evidence? Number two, if this generation applies to AD 70, why would the preceding eschatological signs not culminate within that time frame? All right, you see number 6 on your screen. Brother Collins attempts to refute this by saying, he argues that Matthew 16:27 and 28 refers to Christ's glorification and kingdom establishment at Pentecost. Supported by such passages like Acts 2:33 through 36. He denies a connection to AD 70, stating that the destruction of Jerusalem lacks universal significance of Christ's exaltation. In other words, Brother Collins is merely regurgitating the same nonsense that we have already debunked. In other words, he is not learning from his mistakes. Let's see, what do they say the definition of insanity is? Oh, yeah. All right, so as we assess Brother Collins' offers here, once again, no surprise, once again, Brother Collins does not address the specific time frame set by Jesus. That is, some standing here will not taste of death. And he does not address the specific time frame in light of the destruction of Jerusalem. Brother Collins, there's another contradiction, and that is that he claims Matthew 16:27 refers to judgment and yet confines its fulfillment to Pentecost, despite there being no universal judgment event occurring at Pentecost. All right, so here's our counter questions, Brother Collins. How do you reconcile the time frame of Matthew 16:28 with the destruction of Jerusalem if Pentecost lacked the element of judgment? Now, I know you divorced the two verses. I've demonstrated why that's false. We'll come across this again shortly. Why do you divorce the Son of Man coming in his glory, verse 27, from the Son of Man coming in his kingdom, verse 28, when Jesus presents them as a unified event, Matthew 24:30, the Son of Man coming in power and great glory, which you quoted and blundered into tying it together yourself. Number 3, why are you still ignoring the fact, the textual fact, that Matthew 20:21 and Mark 10:37 unquestionably demonstrate the synonymy of Christ coming in his glory and his coming in his kingdom. You need to deal with that. Okay, you see number 7 on your screen. Brother Collins attempts to rebut this by saying and offering his interpretation, excuse me, and he interprets the coming of the Son of Man in Matthew 23 as Christ coming in dominion at Pentecost. And folks, I tell you what, when I read that the first time, that was literally belly-jarring, laugh-out-loud material. I literally laughed out loud when I read that. Sorry. Brother Collins rejects the connection to AD 70 or final judgment, citing the apostles' incomplete mission as evidence of Pentecost's fulfillment. Yeah. All right, so let's assess Brother Collins' rebuttal. All right, so we have the logical inconsistency here that Brother Collins overlooks the apocalyptic context of Matthew 10:23, which aligns with eschatological judgment. We have a textual inconsistency in that the Son of Man did not come at Pentecost. We have a self-contradiction of Brother Collins as he asserts that the coming of the Son of Man refers to the ascension. And then Brother Collins cries foul and says that I'm misrepresenting him because I said that he has 4 distinct comings of the Son of Man. One at the ascension, one at Pentecost, one in AD 70, and he's waiting on the 4th one. 5th one if you count his incarnation as the first. All right, so here's another contradiction. By limiting the coming of the Son of Man to Pentecost, Brother Collins ignores the judgment themes associated with the coming of the Son of Man. And then we have the hysterical absurdity timeline implications of Brother Collins. His interpretation suggests that Christ comes at Pentecost while simultaneously going away to send the Comforter. His interpretation suggests that the apostles are fleeing from persecution through all the cities of Israel before even beginning their mission in Jerusalem. And by the way, the apostles didn't leave Jerusalem and Judea until Acts chapter 8. His interpretation suggests that the apostles are being drugged before Gentile rulers and kings, Matthew 10:18, before ever uttering the first word to the Jewish audiences in Jerusalem. Folks, I'm going to have to file this one away in my folder of all-time dumbest statements ever. Sorry, not trying to be rude, but I mean, that's a fact with my hand up, as Wendy Bagwell used to say. All right, so here's our counter questions for Brother Collins. Number 1, if the apostles' mission in Israel was incomplete by Pentecost, how does this validate Pentecost as the fulfillment of Matthew 10:23? Which cities of Israel, number 2, had they fled through when Pentecost was the first sermon under the Great Commission? Number 3, which Gentile kings had the 12 apostles been brought before to give testimony of on Pentecost? What textual evidence supports Brother Collins' assertions that Matthew 10:23 excludes eschatological judgment? Brother Collins, how do you reconcile these impossible timeline issues created by your Pentecost interpretation, such as Christ coming while going away, and the apostles being arraigned before Gentile kings on Pentecost Day? to deal with that. And number 6, well, this is not a question. This is just an expression of mine. And this interpretation was so bad that, brother, I'm literally embarrassed for you. All right, number 8, and you see it on your screen. Brother Collins argues that Matthew 26:64 refers to Christ's vindication and enthronement at the right hand of God, aligning with Daniel 7:13 and 14. In other words, his ascension. Brother Collins denies a specific reference to AD 70, interpreting coming on the clouds as symbolic of authority, not physical descent. There's that straw man again. Because no preterist has ever said that Jesus coming in the clouds would be a physical descent. And Brother Collins is supposed to be avoiding logical fallacies. But his material is rife with logical fallacies. All right, so as we assess what Brother Collins has offered, Brother Collins ignores the immediate audience, and that is the Sanhedrin, who were told they would witness this event, which must fit within their lifetime. This fact fits the AD 70 time frame and categorically refutes Brother Collins's interpretation. Brother Collins has a contradiction here because he ties the imagery to Daniel 7, but denies its fulfillment in a judgment context despite Jesus' application to Jerusalem's fall. And once again, this was another belly-shaking, laugh-out-loud moment when I read this material. So we have the historical and the hysterical absurdity of Brother Collins's interpretation. And that is that the Sanhedrin could not have seen Christ's ascension because they were not present at the ascension. And this falsifies Brother Collins's goofy interpretation of Matthew 26:64 as referring solely to the ascension. Oh, hi there. Meet Jack. This is Jack Kitty. Hi, Jack. Keep this up, I'm going to be like Dave McKeegan that has his puppy dog on his lap every time he makes a video. All right. So the second counter question is, Brother Collins, how do you reconcile Daniel 7's judgment elements with your restricted interpretation of Matthew 26:64? Did you get that? You're applying the judgment of Daniel 7:9 and following to the ascension. Number 3, since the Sanhedrin were not present at the ascension, how can you aver that they saw the fulfillment of Jesus' statement recorded in Matthew 26:64? All right, number 9, you see it on your screen. Brother Collins dismisses the AD 70 connection here, stating that melo in Acts 24:15 signifies certainty, not imminence. And he argues the resurrection described is a universal and future event, aligning with 1 Corinthians 15 and Revelation 20. I actually agree with part of that it aligns with 1 Corinthians 15 and Revelation 20. But Brother Collins appeals to Acts 11:28. I'm sorry. That was another instance of where I literally laughed out loud when I read this. Oh my goodness. But Brother Collins appeals to Acts 11:28, where Agabus the prophet predicted that there would be a famine, and he used the Greek verb melo. And Brother Collins says that this demonstrates the term does not always indicate imminence. And he gives the vague generalization in his reference to BDAG without providing a specific quote. and insisting that now you got to get this, he insists that the overwhelming consensus of scholarship, by quoting this one vague reference, that the overwhelming consensus of scholarship says Mello emphasizes necessity rather than immediacy. All right, so as we assess Brother Collins's rebuttals, I see that it is heavily ironic to me that in order to evade Hebrews 8:13, where it says that the first covenant was growing old and ready to vanish away, that futurists always argue that, well, now Paul was speaking from the standpoint of Jeremiah the prophet's perspective, standing in his shoes, but Jesus and the apostles said the coming of the Lord has drawn near, and that means it's still in our future because they stated it in the future tense. And then we have the laughable, hysterical, laughable moment of his misuse of Acts 11 and 28. And I mean, it literally put my abs into cramps, folks. I laughed so much at this. But Brother Collins' example of Mello in Acts 11:28 was predicting a famine that happened about 3 years following that. But this somehow makes Mello not indicate imminence. And you see, Brother Collins, he denies the meaning of imminence with his straw man of instantaneous. In other words, because the famine didn't strike before Agabus was able to get off his knees, then Mello just can't mean imminence. And you see, folks, what Brother Collins is doing here is again the old shell game of switching terms. Only this time he has substituted the definition of parakrima for the present tense verb mellow, and then denies the definition of mellow. And he is ignoring the root meaning because through his reinterpretation or substitution of definitions, maybe I should say, he is contradicting established lexicons and grammars that consistently affirm that mellow in the present tense conveys imminence when paired with the infinitive. For example, Vines says to be about to do something, often implying the necessity and therefore the certainty of what is to take place, which inherently includes soonness. Blast de Brunner grammar, I hope I pronounced that right, or at least close. They confirm, quote, melanin with the infinitive expresses imminence, page 181. And here's the funny part, folks. Both, not just one, both Acts 11:28 and Acts 24:15 use mellow with the infinitive. Oops! And Brother Collins is guilty of manipulating and misrepresenting the Greek grammars just like he does with Scripture. And you see, he is redefining terminology. He reinterprets and redefines mellow to mean certainty rather than imminence, contrary to its contextual use. And in eschatological text, in all eschatological texts, per Brother Collins, mellow consistently conveys certainty, not imminence. While in all non-eschatological texts, well, it conveys imminence. Funny how that works, isn't it? But you see, what's going on here is, in all eschatological texts, mellow consistently conveys urgency. You know, like in 2 Timothy 4 and verse 1, where Paul uses it in the context of a statement that is identical to Peter's statement in 1 Peter 4 and verse 5, where Peter said God is ready to judge the living and the dead. And James says that the parousia, that is the singular noun parousia with the definite article, which indicates a singular, unique event, that James said it has drawn near, and the judge is standing right at the door. James 5, 8, and 9. Which likewise is parallel to Jesus saying in Matthew 24:33, when you see all these things, that's the generation that would witness the fall of the temple, per Brother Collins. When you see all these things, know that it is near at the doors. And you see, all these terms clearly communicate imminence, not mere certainty. And Brother Collins has to interpret them to mean something other than what they actually say. And you see, this is a glaring double standard by Brother Collins in redefining mellow into the exact opposite of what it means in all other non-eschatological texts. All right, counter questions, Brother Collins. Here comes. Number one, how do you justify dismissing mellow's imminence in Acts 24:15 when grammars like Blas de Brunner and Vines, which I quoted, affirm the exact opposite? Number two, since Acts 11:28 demonstrates mellow with the infinitive, which indicates certain imminence, why do you assert the opposite? And that this alters its consistent use everywhere else that is about to occur throughout the New Testament? Sorry, Brother Collins, you blundered there. You stuck your whole leg in your mouth on that one. Number three, how do you reconcile your contradiction of imminence in Acts 24:15, which has mellow with the infinitive, with the immediate context of Paul's urgency regarding judgment of the oikoumene, the Roman Empire? And lastly, number 10, sound like Dave Letterman here, chalking them off. Number 10, and you see it on your screen. Brother Collins' rebuttal? Well, he argues that Daniel 7:13 and 14 refers to Christ's ascension and enthronement, not a return to earth. So there you have it, that straw man again. Because no proponent of fulfillment has ever said that Jesus was coming back to earth. Or if they do, I don't know about it. I know I've never said it, and you're addressing my argument, and I haven't said it. And so, Brother Collins also separates the destruction of Jerusalem from the final resurrection and judgment, interpreting these as future events. Again, standard blah, blah, blah. All right, so let's assess his last points here. So we have the logical inconsistency in that Brother Collins separates Daniel 7:13 from the judgment of Daniel 7:9 through 10, 11, and so forth, and flatly contradicting Jesus' application of that prophecy to the events of AD 70. And then we have the contradiction. By denying Daniel 7's fulfillment by the fall of the temple, Brother Collins undermines his New Testament application to first century eschatology and the first century audience to whom he was directly speaking. I want to read that question again. I kind of goofed it up a little bit. All right. So his contradiction is, by denying Daniel 7's fulfillment by the fall of the temple, Brother Collins undermines its New Testament application to first century eschatology and the first century audience to whom Jesus was directly speaking. Okay, so here's their counter questions. Number one, Brother Collins, how do you reconcile Jesus' application of Daniel 7 to Jerusalem's destruction with your claim that it pertains solely to the ascension? Number 2, how can you sleep at night knowing that you have so butchered these texts as to have the 3.5-year war of the little horn prior to the ascension? Number 3, how can you with a clear conscience make such ridiculous assertions which divorce the coming of the Son of Man from the judgment scene in the text of Daniel 7? Number 4, how can you have an honest heart and make such catastrophic, blundering self-contradictions as divorcing the coming of the Son of Man from the judgment scene of Daniel 7 while at the same time tying them together in Matthew 16:27? Number 5, if Daniel's judgment, Daniel 7's judgment, is future to us, then how do you address the thematic unity demonstrated between Matthew 24, Revelation 11:18, and Revelation 14:14 and following? Look those passages up, folks. And so just a couple of general observations on self-contradictions, and that is on immanence versus universality. Brother Collins repeatedly affirms the New Testament's immanent language, but denies it as he interprets it as future. And he interprets it as a future universal framework, which is inconsistent with a first century fulfillment and completely divorced from the promises God made to Old Covenant Israel after the flesh. Romans 9:3 and following, when Brother Collins has admitted that the adoption is resurrection, and Paul says the adoption was a promise made to Old Covenant Israel after the flesh, and Brother Collins has admitted that all prophecy, all Old Testament prophecy regarding the judgment of Israel was fulfilled in AD 70. Again, I don't think a stand-up comic could come up with such a ridiculous routine. So we see that each of Brother Collins's rebuttals contains huge gaping holes in addressing the points of my argument, along with a host of contradictions and logical fallacies. Not once did he breathe on the heart of my argument, and that is how Jesus cited, quoted, and interpreted and posited those prophecies. But boy howdy, he surely did give us a ton of his presuppositional, opinionated, contradictory, bias, and pretextual nonsense. Some 46 words worth. But it was in a neat layout, folks. Appreciate that. All right, so this is going to bring this video to its conclusion. And I thank you so much for your time. Please don't forget to hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons. Stay with us, folks. We got a lot more good material coming. And we'll do you some good if you'll just study your Bible with an open heart, looking at the context. Stop reading yourself into the context, folks. Those things weren't written to you and me. They were written to a first century audience. And we have to learn how to interpret them as how the audience, the intended audience, would have understood what was being said. All right. So until our next scheduled video, folks, I pray that God will bless you richly in your study of His Word. Stay warm, folks, and you have a blessed day.